They said the heat at Gettysburg made the air sing like a struck wire. The third morning dawned bright and pitiless, July 3rd, 1863, and the long ridge that guarded the town glittered with dew on stone walls and brass guns. At the very center of the Union line, on Cemetery Ridge, a young lieutenant stood with one hand braced on a gun trail, and his jaw set in the way men do when they have already decided what the day will cost. Alonzo Hereford Cushing, 22, commanded Battery A, 4th U.S. Artillery, a handful of Napoleons and 3-inch rifles, and a shrinking number of men after 2 days that had chewed through regiments as if the fields themselves were hungry. If Robert E. Lee meant to break the Union that day, the blow would land here, and Cushing knew it. He had come to this ridge by a path that began far from Pennsylvania's farms. Cushing was shaped by a frontier childhood in Delafield, Wisconsin. Woods and water, chores at first light, winters that taught patience the way a stern teacher corrects posture. His father died when Alonzo was a boy. His mother, the daughter of pioneers, held 4 sons in a steady orbit by the gravity of work and faith. The West toughened them. It taught thrift and endurance, and the habit of meeting problems head-on because there was seldom another option. Alonzo went east to West Point, graduating near the bottom of his class. Too much laughter and friendship, too little love for mathematics, but instructors marked him as a born cannoneer who could read ground, wind, and distance like a second alphabet. He was slim, quiet, quick to grin, the sort of officer whose calm arranged chaos without raising his voice. The battery took wounds on the first day and worse on the second, yet they held. Now the third day found them in a position no one would surrender. A slight forward bulge at the center, a low stone wall for cover, a clear field of fire across rolling pasture toward the distant woods of Seminary Ridge. The artillery duel before noon felt like standing inside a storm. Confederate guns hammered the Union crest for nearly 2 hours. The air shook. Sand and smoke scoured faces until eyes watered and throats burned. Shells burst among caissons and limbers, splintering spokes and ringing helmets like bells. Water boiled away in the sponge buckets. Men stuffed wads of grass in their ears and still felt percussion in their teeth. Through it, Cushing moved along the line, voice level, counting the seconds between shots, telling his crews when to sponge, when to run the piece in, when to open the vent, when to fire. A battery is a machine powered by rhythm. He kept the time. When the barrage slackened, a strange quiet fell. Only the rasp of leather, the small chime of harness buckles, the far murmur of orders carried on the wind. Then figures stepped from the tree line a mile away and arranged themselves in long dressed ranks. Flags shook out their colors. Officers on horseback pointed with swords. The ground itself seemed to take a breath. This was the great assault that would be named for George Pickett, but would draw in men from 3 Confederate divisions, a wave of gray crossing open land under a hard sky toward a wall of stone and iron. Cushing knew what was coming, a test of will at close quarters. He also knew his battery was wounded. They had lost men and horses. Ammunition sat low. One gun stood silent, axle split by a shell. There was no depth behind him worth speaking of. The center would hold with what stood, or it would break. The ranks advanced, drums quiet, flags steady, officers dressing the line as if on parade. As the distance closed, Union guns took their measure. Cushing told his surviving pieces to hold fire until every pound of powder earned its due. The first enemy shells fell long, the next came true. A hissing fragment slashed his right shoulder. He cinched a handkerchief under his coat and waved off the first sergeant's plea to go to the rear. Then another fragment tore open his abdomen and dropped him to one knee. Blood soaked his waist. His face went gray, but his voice never lost its edge. "I will fight it out with my guns," he said, and the sentence had the weight of an oath. He ordered the two remaining pieces forward to the low wall, where ground swelled and the view widened enough to rake the field. He had to be carried. His legs would not answer. Propped behind a gun, he leaned into the breach like a boxer braced against ropes. "Double canister," he told the crew. The command carried a meaning everyone understood. Iron hail at close range, the work of stopping men with a storm. The Confederates came on, steady and dreadful, over fences and swales, dressing the line again after each obstacle. Brigades rippled, shivered under fire, closed up, and kept moving. As they entered the killing ground, Union rifles along the wall added their tearing crackle to the battery's thunder. Cushing waited until he could see faces. "Now," he said. The blast punched barn-wide holes through the front ranks. Flags dipped and recovered. Dust and white smoke thickened. The next load came, and the next, the piece baking hot, the sponge hissing, men working with that frantic economy soldiers summon when seconds become a currency. Cushing sighted along the barrel himself, pointed with two blood-slicked fingers toward a knot of colors in the center. "There," he said. "Give them canister." A bullet struck him in the mouth and drove out the back of his head. He folded where he stood and slid to the ground beside the wheel, hand still near the breach he had been sighting. First Sergeant Frederick Fugger stepped into the space without ceremony and bellowed orders, keeping the last guns firing while the gray tide, torn and furious, crashed against the wall. Some men vaulted the stones. Some fired point blank. There was grappling and clubbing and the intimate ugliness of war measured in arms' lengths. A banner from Virginia reached the wall and tilted as its bearer fell. Another hand found the staff and raised it again before smoke closed like weather around the scene. Then the attack faltered. Union regiments on the flanks poured fire into the sides of the assault. A countercharge surged from behind the wall. What had advanced in precision retreated in confusion, leaving the field littered with bodies, torn haversacks, broken muskets, and the small domestic debris that always seems most terrible after a fight. A letter crushed into mud, a shoe without a mate, a photograph slick with canteen water. When the smoke thinned, Cemetery Ridge still belonged to the Union. At its shattered center lay a thin young officer who had refused to yield his guns. They carried Alonzo Cushing from the wall and buried him with the honors a field could spare, then sent word west to the mother who had already given so much. His brothers bore the news with that private pride frontier families know, the pride that coexists with ache because the land teaches both. One brother, William, would win his own fame at sea in a reckless night attack that sank a Confederate ironclad. Another would die young. The ledger of sacrifice ran through the family like a tight-drawn wire. For a time, Alonzo's name receded under the avalanche of other names the war made. Veterans remembered him, told their children about the officer who was dying and would not step back, and those children told others. Guides at Gettysburg pointed to the wall, where the center held and spoke his name into hot summer air. Historians traced the battery's log, read eyewitness accounts, and kept the story upright. Generations later, citizens and soldiers petitioned Washington to recognize what men on that ridge had known at a glance. Paperwork drifted, stalled, resumed, and at last, in 2014, the Medal of Honor was awarded. The citation used clean words, refused to leave the field, remained with his guns, continued to direct the fire of his battery despite mortal wounds. Behind those words stands the picture that matters, a frontier son leaning into a cannon, drawing a line he would not let the day cross. Call it Civil War if you like, it is also a Western story. The West shaped Cushing before the Army did. He learned to stand still in weather that tested patience, to work until the job was done, because the land did not care about excuses. That habit of mind traveled with him from Wisconsin pines to Pennsylvania pasture. On July 3rd, It met a storm and did not move. Frontier courage is not the shout that fills a room. It is the quiet sentence a man says to himself when the world leans hard against him. I will fight it out right here. Walk the ridge now, and the field looks ordinary. Cattle in the distance, a hawk riding thermals, a wall of warm stone with tourists resting their elbows along its top. Read the plaques until the bronze blurs, and then stop at the short line that marks Cushing's place. Stand a minute, and you can almost hear cadence in the wind, the clang of a rammer, the one-syllable command that sends iron into the air. Wars are decided by many hands, but sometimes a hinge closes because one man refuses to let it swing the wrong way. In that heat, in that noise, at the precise middle of a republic's gamble, Alonzo Cushing held his ground until there was nothing left to stand with but will, and that was enough. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.